Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to the January 2021 episode of News and Brews Sports Biz, our podcast and video series that features new developments impacting the business of college sports. I'm Katie Davis, and I'm here with Ken Kurtzel. Ken, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for a time when things are just precedented instead of being unprecedented all the time. So while 2021 is a giant question mark, we didn't expect it to be like, hey, 2020, hold my beer. But now that we're 10 months into the pandemic, and I feel like there's a lot more clarity and direction around where things may be headed, as opposed to a complete uncertainty that was at the start of the pandemic. So with that, I thought we would come up with a new hot topics list as we're starting off 2021, based on what we're seeing across the higher education and collegiate athletics industries. But first things first, Ken, let's toast to a new year that's bound to only get better from here on out. What are you having today?
I am drinking Dense Fog Advisory from one of our favorite Gainesville breweries, First Magnitude. And anybody who's watched or listened to our podcast on here knows that we're all about hazy IPAs, and it's a hazy double IPA, and honestly is one of the best ones they've ever made. It's amazing. It's a great start to 2021. So I'm very happy about that beer.
Yeah, that one is a good one. I've had that one too. I am having another First Magnitude brew. I'm not drinking the whole bottle today, but this is called Alapaha Rise, and it's a maple bourbon barrel aged imperial chestnut brown ale, and it is very good. So cheers to 2021.
Cheers to 2021. So off to a rough start, but hopefully we get better going forward. So
exactly. So we're going to share our top 5 hot topics. And the first one that we wanted to put out there for everybody is that January 15th is the NCAA agreed upon procedures and financial reporting system deadline. So we wanted to give you some quick last minute reminders as you're wrapping that up. Ken, do you want to start with sharing some things you think about that?
Absolutely. Anybody who's listened to us previously has probably heard the line, tell your financial story. It's something that we're big advocates for here at James Moore & Company, and the collegiate athletic clients that we work with. We spend a lot of time with them talking about how they can use their agreed upon procedures report to tell their financial story a little bit better, knowing that it oftentimes can get skewed from reports that most notably the USA Today and others will pick up on these reports and tell a different story. So some of the ways they can do that are through the addition of certain disclosures that can give information to the reader. A big part, though, is really helping to educate others on campus about what the report does and doesn't report and some of the unique aspects of it. Another thing is to provide it online, maybe make it available online even with some commentary. So again, at some point that the USA Today or your local paper is going to get a Freedom of Information Act and is going to get this report and then write stories on it. So try to get out ahead of that. Try to tell the story before you have the story told for you, so to speak. So those are some of the big things that we have, and I know you have some other ideas too, probably, Katie.
Well, yeah, I mean, the FOIA point is very a good point, especially this year heading into COVID, when you've probably likely already received that information and have been communicating with media as things have progressed through the pandemic. And I spoke recently with a sports blogger, Matt Brown, and was featured in one of his articles, and where I said one of my biggest pet peeves was that people don't understand the reporting and people misspeak when they're reporting on that information. And so, as you've been going through and projecting losses, the last thing you want to do is reflect that you've got a huge surplus, because the NCAA financial reporting model doesn't take everything into account. We actually recommend to our clients, if that's the case, when you're looking at that subtotal and you're seeing that that's doesn't feel like what you've been projecting and it's going to communicate the wrong message, you can move some of the lines that are the other reported items below the line. For example, line 56 is your capital expenditures. We highly recommend that you move that line up above the line so that you can show those capital expenditures coming out as well to get to your true bottom line. The NCAA has approved this format, and I think it just tells a lot better story. If you're not comfortable doing that, at least have a supplemental disclosure that further explains it, and also educate those on campus that respond to FOIAs to not only provide what you submit to the NCAA, but also provide your more detailed agreed upon procedures anytime anyone's requesting that information. The other thing is making sure that, because we are still continuing to see errors in the grants and aid revenue distribution equivalency calculations, that generally is what happens when you're not using NCAA Compliance Assistant and you're using another third-party software such as ARMS or Jump Forward. Those revenue distribution equivalencies aren't calculated correctly, and you could be leaving money on the table. Not that there's a ton of extra money at the NCAA to go around this year, but it's still going to potentially be less coming to you if you're not calculating that correctly. So double check that and make sure your compliance team understands the difference between the different equivalencies out there, and that you're pulling the right one in for the grants and aid revenue distribution, which takes the cost of attendance into account and some other things that are different between the two. And for more information on that, we have some articles on our website where you can read up a little bit more on details there. But again, we know that you're trying to get as much revenue as possible right now, and would hate for you to leave that on the table.
Absolutely. Definitely not the year to leave it on the table, as we have the hardest year ever probably for collegiate athletics from a dollar standpoint, and really looking probably at the next year being pretty significantly impacted as well.
Yes, for sure. So moving on to hot topic number 2, we want to share with you a little bit about late December. An additional $90 billion of COVID stimulus funds was approved, and there is quite an impact on higher education as well as the sports business and the general public, which is made up of your fans. So, Ken, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the impacts to higher education?
Absolutely, yes. The coronavirus, well, the COVID relief package that had a lot of drama around it. It was the type of thing that passed Congress, and then Trump threatened to veto it, and then finally ended up signing it after a while. So it was kind of touch and go as to whether or not that would come into fruition. But fortunately it did. And yeah, the overall package is $900 billion. There's about 23 billion, just shy of 23 billion, that's assigned to institutes of higher education. And that's a little bit more than the CARES Act, but still well less than what higher education and the CUBO were really pushing for. But nonetheless, 23 billion is going to be distributed. There's various aspects of that distribution that impact how much each institution gets, but it will help athletics indirectly, even if not directly, in the sense that institutions can use some of these funds, associated with the additional testing that's required related to the pandemic, to help defray some of the costs that are associated with increased pandemic costs. There's a lot of complexities about how the funds are to be spent specifically, but nonetheless, it certainly helps institutions to have something coming that can indirectly benefit athletics. We do have a good article on our webpage that goes into a little bit more detail on how that all gets allocated. One other aspect that many of our listeners and viewers have probably heard about is it also expands the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, as it's better known, creates a round 2 of funding on that. Not a lot of higher education institutions would necessarily be eligible for that, since it doesn't apply to governments, and but it does expand to a couple other nonprofits like 501c6s. It does allow for a second round of that for institutions or organizations that may have received a first round payment on that. If you have a 25% revenue decline in any quarter this year, there is an opportunity to apply for a second round of funding. So that's something definitely, especially for nonprofit organizations that support the universities. If you have employees be looking at that as whether or not you may or may not be eligible for it. Again, every bit helps.
Well, so what do you think about athletic associations that are separate 501c3s and whether they should go for it, whether they're allowed to go for it, or are there any roadblocks that prohibit them from it, even if, I mean, if granted, if it hits the papers, people are going to have a fit about it. But at the end of the day, everyone needs money, and this is stimulus money out there for you. But can you talk about some of the roadblocks there?
Yeah, the public perception certainly is one that an institution would need to look at, because as we saw with some of the public companies that went after funds in the first round, they were, quite frankly, they were publicly shamed into giving the money back. So even though athletics has had a massive revenue hit, and there's no question from a fiscal standpoint that there is need there. There could be a perception issue associated with that. So I think institutions would need to look at that. Probably the main thing that will stop a lot of those that are set up as associations is just the employee count, which is looking at really the round two is looking at those with employee counts of 300 or less. So most of the ones that we work with and have talked to obviously are well north of that number, and as far as number of FTEs that they have. So that's probably the big roadblock for a lot of them. But again, some ancillary organizations that may be set up to support athletics or to support the university that have smaller numbers of employees, that it might be something worth looking into. And we have seen, in a couple of clients' cases, we have seen it in the higher education area. It's on the rare side, but it does exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you have a separate booster club, look into that, but also look into any particular, especially if you're a public school and your state might have some restrictions on what you can take out debt for, because technically the PPP is a loan that, if you meet all the requirements, it gets forgiven, but that can be another roadblock that we've seen.
Absolutely.
That keeps athletic associations, or really potentially any supporting organization for a university, from being able to tap into these funds.
Right, definitely.
More specific to the sports business, you mentioned the 501c6s didn't qualify for PPP the first round, and they do now. And another really important type of 501c6 organization is your convention and visitors bureaus. So what that means is they're able to hire, which hopefully that means they can hit the ground running on more youth sporting events and other marquee events that come to your cities. And what I would recommend you do is have some proactive outreach with your local visitors bureau, or if you have a sports commission locally that's working to bring these events to your town. And I would say your facilities are probably more ideal this year than maybe in the past for a similar event, just because they're larger, and these events would want to have more comfort with additional social distancing. So this could be a really good win as you're looking for some alternative revenue generators. Potentially, these funds come from the state level and maybe beyond, and that could shift some to you as well if you're willing to give your facilities up for these types of events. And if you can proactively work with these organizations and help pull strings to lobby for them to come to your town, I think that would be a huge benefit to the local businesses, as well as utilization of your facilities right now. And speaking of facilities, there's also in this the stimulus package, there's about $15 billion of grant program for live venues. So your stadiums and your arenas that have lost at least 25% of revenues due to the pandemic. I haven't read up details on that yet, but what I plan to do is look further into that to see how do they define venue and revenue. Is it something that if your stadium is part of your university's capital assets, does that qualify, or does it have to be a separate legal entity to qualify? So we're looking into some of that and plan to put some information out there soon about that. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing that we're seeing out of the out of the big package is, of course, the most famous, the big headline part about it is the stimulus to individuals, the $600 per person that goes out. And then there's additional talk, especially with Democrats taking control of the Senate through the Georgia runoffs, of increasing that to $2,000. There was a lot of press about that, so we'll have to see where legislation goes in the next few weeks as the administration changes, and whether that gets bumped up to 2,000. But certainly, again, the indirect benefit of looking at athletics and looking at just the fact that collegiate athletics are part of the oftentimes discretionary funds that people have. So every bit that helps the general economy, that helps put money in people's pockets, can have a trickle down effect. Not substantial probably, because obviously there's much bigger needs, but to the extent that there is more money in pockets, does allow for hopefully more money coming into discretionary type entertainment, related type funds. The other thing that we're seeing in it too is the stimulus that has pieces for the purchase and distribution of vaccines. And so a lot of the higher education institutions we work with have very robust, health areas that are going to be a big part of the vaccine distribution, typically working hand in hand with their public health departments. So I would expect to see funds definitely flow through the higher education landscape related to that distribution of vaccines part.
Well, not only that, but having the funds to be able to distribute vaccines to the public, that's just going to get them vaccinated faster and get them, able to, come to a game hopefully in the fall.
Well,
and
we certainly know we can't get the fans in the stands until that happens.
Yep. Yeah. Well, number 3 hot topic, Ken already alluded to this, but it's the impacts of the election and the changes to administration, and how that's going to impact higher education and college athletics.
Yeah, and that's obviously a big unknown, but there's no doubt there would be a big impact. A couple of the things that we're seeing that are likely under a Biden administration is expansion of the Pell Grants, which can again have indirect benefits to all parts of a university. That'll certainly be on the table. Biden has made clear that he wants to increase that. He wants a big overhaul of financial aid in general, not necessarily athletics related, but student loans are something that's on the table. A general overhaul of the whole financial aid process is very likely. Certainly not the expert on it. We'd have to go back to our friend from a recent podcast, Justin, who talked a little bit about Title IX. It's undoubted that there could be some impacts to Title IX with a new education secretary. So there's various impacts, and we're kind of working on an article about that we hope to publish and get out there soon that talks about some of the various impacts of a new administration. But we know that undoubtedly it's going to be significant.
Yeah, I mean, anything I think related to financial aid that can continue to encourage people to enroll, because there's assistance for them to be able to pay for their college courses. Enrollment numbers are a huge metric for college athletics. Whether you are funded by student fees or not, it still has an indirect impact for you all. And I know a lot of you do rely on student fees very heavily, and that will be a huge benefit to your programs. And not only is it with the change in the Biden administration, but the change in the majority of Congress, I think, will impact some of the NIL movements. Of course, right now that's another giant question mark, but a week or so ago, Tom McMillan came out and made his comments about how he thought that we would see a shift. Of course, there's going to have to be some give and take between all the different federal bills that are out there. And thankfully it is supported by both parties, but there'll probably be a lot more built in than just the basic NIL stuff, with the Democratic Party taking the majority. And that could have, a huge impact. But again, I don't think it's going to happen at the federal level anytime soon, just because of everything dealing with COVID and the other changes in administration. But then there's a second roadblock with NIL that's not necessarily specific to the elections, but the NCAA was going to vote on their guidelines that they were planning to put out, and of course they've delayed that because the Department of Justice has come out and made some claims about antitrust, and of course that's got everyone concerned right now, and so that's been put on pause. But the NAIA has effectively rolled out their own guidelines related to name, image, and likeness, and there have been articles of some student athletes that have started to earn money off of their name, image, and likeness. And so that's interesting to see at the NAIA level, and I think the NCAA should watch that and see where the trends are going to really understand. My personal opinion is you're going to have maybe 50 athletes that are going to be the, bringing in the big dollars from sponsorships, but you're going to have a significant majority of your athletes that are just getting apparel or a little bit of money or other, products here and there as they're doing, advertising for these companies on social media. So you'll want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that and encouraging fair guardrails that make sense and that aren't going to create too much of a hassle when July comes around and Florida goes live with this, as well as, other states are soon to follow. And, I think eventually Congress will have to get to it, but I'm skeptical it's going to happen before July.
Oh, I strongly agree with you. Absolutely. There's a lot of big things on the docket, and when they get to NIL will be a big question.
Yeah. So hot topic number 4 is the impact of moving fall sports into the winter and spring seasons. And now schools are starting to feel that. I would say that, it's kind of like, okay, we're going to kick the can, we're going to keep people safe, and now we're doing a lot and with less. So Kim, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think you said it well. It's one of those things that, initially, I mean, undoubtedly, conferences and schools knew that it was going to be challenging, but then probably are, facing now the real big impacts of that. Just thinking the logistics of kind of piling sports seasons on top of sports seasons. And, there's only so many operations people that probably are in each school's department or association. And then that number could be even lower than it was a year ago with layoffs that have occurred. So you have manpower shortages combined with doubling up on certain sports. And then, just the pure logistics of kind of trying to manage all of that when you're short staffed. I absolutely don't envy anybody who's in that role of operations for athletics right now, trying to balance all of this while all still, even though we do have the vaccine and it's starting to come out and there's maybe bright times coming ahead, we're still, in a deep, dark spot with this right now. So trying to keep all of your student athletes safe while at the same time managing multiple sports that are in different seasons now. And it's honestly, it's a nightmare.
It is. And we've heard this from multiple schools at all levels. And, I think there's something to be said for watching and observing and learning as schools navigated football season. But there's still so much uncertainty, and how you handle a football team with a large roster is very different than how you would have to handle some smaller rosters like basketball and even your other Olympic sports. And so the COVID testing, it adds up. And there continue to be cash flow shortages. So, each school that we're talking to is a little bit different on how their conference handles it and how it's funded there, as well as what's available within your institution. So regardless, though, that's a huge hit to the budget. So looking at that, looking at what is it going to look like when your athletes are able to get the vaccine, and how does that shift your budgeting and even time allotment from going from testing to vaccine, and are you going to have to continue to test after that? I mean, there's a lot of questions related to that, but as you're going through the winter and spring season, just keeping an eye on your students and your staff and yourselves from a mental health standpoint, as well as keeping an eye on your financial budgeting and the ramifications that come from a delayed sporting season that now has a significant amount of expenditures related to participation and travel and et cetera. So definitely keep an eye on that. And we're thinking about you, and we're rooting for your teams to have a successful season and for your athletes to feel fulfilled in what they love doing. But then there's also the pipeline of future athletes, and how does this impact recruiting?
Well, certainly there is an impact to recruiting too, and this year is a complicated year. It is the best, kind of nicest way to put it. Everybody's well aware of the fact that athletes get an extra year of eligibility, that this year doesn't count. So that's creating kind of a one-year bubble we'll see how many athletes take advantage of that. It could be that there's a good number of seniors that are kind of ready to get on with life. For whether it's professional sports or other that won't necessarily take advantage of it, although I would expect there to be some that do. There's increased numbers of people, especially in football, in the transfer market. A really good article or an interview that Greg Sankey from the SEC had with Sports Illustrated the other day about talking about the challenges of in football, the 25 initial counters, and how that gets impacted by the transfer market and all of this, and that really the NCAA really needs to seriously look at making a modification on that front. So I think recruiting is challenging right now. It's challenging, obviously, also just from a logistics standpoint of it's not the traditional recruiting year that most coaches are used to. So again, it kind of comes back to it's all a little bit of a mess, and schools are making the best of it that they can.
Well, and the schools that chose to defer their fall seasons into the winter and spring, hopefully some of the prospects that you were looking at are still looking at you and haven't moved on to another school that did participate in the fall because, they were in front of them. So, I think there's a lot of challenges related to that and unintended consequences for any of these choices that are made right now. Unfortunately, there's no right choice and there's no winner. When it comes to the pandemic, obviously. So, I do think everyone's doing the best they can in the circumstances, and hopefully these athletes find a great opportunity for them wherever they go, and hopefully your programs continue to be successful with a pipeline of new athletes coming in.
Absolutely.
So hot topic number 5 is the just speculating on fall 2021 and beyond. And, I mentioned before about cash flow challenges for schools that, either delayed sports or didn't have the revenues coming in, especially some of the larger programs that have boosters that allow their boosters to roll their contributions into the 2021 football season instead of taking a refund. And so really that just kicked the can, and hopefully those boosters will come in 2021 and feel safe doing so. But I think that just because things start to turn around, that doesn't mean the cash flow is going to turn around right away.
Oh no, definitely not. As you mentioned, this is a multi-year impact, obviously. Even under the best case scenarios of kind of getting things back on track sometime this summer or fall, the fiscal impact is going to be felt for multiple years. But as you mentioned, though, looking at fall 2021, the good part about that is we can at least talk with some level of hope. The vaccines are getting rolled out. Unfortunately, there's, as you've seen in the press, it's a little slow, and that's discouraging, the slowness of getting it out. But I think there's great hope that it will start to accelerate here. The Biden administration has a plan of trying to have, they talk about 100 million shots in 100 days, which I think that, there's got to be bipartisan support for that. I mean, the idea of actually getting the vaccine rolled out as fast as possible so that we can get to some level of herd immunity that then allows fans to actually want to come back and allows the stadiums to start to fill up again, giving that confidence that we need, that we're past the pandemic and can kind of go back to some level of normal, even if it's not our old normal, is huge. So I'm choosing to remain optimistic, and I, certainly can't wait till I get the opportunity in turn to get a vaccine. And then, really looking at we're looking at schools that are trying to take a hard look at fall 2021 and see, what's going to sell. I mean, hopefully we're selling a lot more seats than we were able to do this past year, but also looking at, are there ways to create more premium options in stadiums without spending a lot of money, knowing that a lot of schools have had good success with their premium seating, and it could be that that's really kind of the prime area that there's opportunity to get people back in the stands on, and then also just giving that level of confidence that that it's safe and that the fans can come back. And certainly the older you are, the more challenged that might be. So again, it's really going to come down to a confidence level that enough of our society has either had the vaccine or had the virus, and that we're somehow past these surges to really get people confident about buying tickets again and getting back to the stadiums.
I mean, I think regardless, all schools need to go into the fact that fan experience is not going to be the same. So how you are approaching that, how you're strategizing around it, you need to reset and think about it and think, okay, we can't go back to the way we used to do things. You'd love to get some of your older boosters back in the seats, and hopefully a lot of them will, but chances are some of them won't. And it's time to start looking at engaging some of your younger fan base and getting them excited about coming. I did like, what with the college football playoff and what I was seeing online about how concession stands were operating, and there's a QR code at your seat and you can order from your seat, and essentially it's an entire cashless experience that really there wasn't a significant capital outlay to handle that. And that's just the convenience of getting food and beverage at your seat. So we've talked to a lot of schools about this, and I think it's going to be something that they're really going to have to challenge themselves and think about. How can we create a premium experience that gets people to want to get off their couch and outside of their upgraded living rooms that they've invested in over the last year and come back? And really, I think it's the stuff outside of the stadium. It's the tailgating. It's the interacting with your team. If there's a way to cheer them on as they're heading into the stadium, or getting your marching band involved to get the fans rallied, and coming to sporting events, as much as it is cheering on your team, it's also very social. And
yes,
we're going to have to slowly allow some of that social interaction to happen again to get people really interested to come back.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, hopefully what we'll see is there's a strong yearning to be back and have that experience that can't be replicated in your living room, of actually being with fellow fans of your team and cheering them on and smelling the tailgates and all of that, and really just kind of making that a big part of drawing people back.
Mm-hmm. And, as you're thinking about this, you're thinking about it from a budgeting standpoint as well. And talked to a school last week that said they were in the middle of their 2022 budgeting process and taking it to the university's board to approve it. And, it's a challenge any year to explain your budget and explain just athletics, operations, and budgeting in general to people that don't see it every day. And then taking on top of that the uncertainties that you're having to project out into 2022 now. And like I said earlier, there is some clarity that I think that you really don't know. Where before it was like, okay, this is going to be a hiccup and we'll be able to come back. And now it's like, no, this is the long game. So there's more clarity around that, and being a little more conservative in budgeting, but realistic, and knowing this is what we're going to need to be able to sustain our programs and sustain them successfully and keep our athletes safe and our fans safe. And so, being able to project that out and communicate that based on, different revenue models that are coming in, with hopes of having more fans or more sponsorships and things like that as things start to turn around. But it's really hard to look that far ahead, especially now. So I empathize with you, and we're always happy to be a sounding board to any of you that want to talk through it or even just vent, because it is frustrating to have to be able to communicate that to other stakeholders around your campus that don't really understand athletics very well.
Right. Absolutely.
And the other thing to communicate, and we talked about this in our December episode, was name, image, and likeness. And this is hitting the news. It's a hot topic. People don't understand it. People don't understand the difference between state legislation, federal legislation, NCAA legislation, and what really who drives the ultimate decision. And they don't understand how athletes are getting paid. So the more you can explain some of that, and we understand you're building into your budgets some pretty large dollars to bring in some of these consultants to help you with NIL, because let's face it, it's a huge recruiting advantage just to even say that you're engaging with somebody. So keep people informed about that as you're learning more about it, and don't jump the gun too much. But there are some issues that you're going to have to stay on top of that are regardless of the rules, and that's educating your student athletes on protecting your school's brand while they're promoting their own brand.
Right.
Educating them on how to handle finances. I've said this before, but one of the things that really concerns me is some of your student athletes that are partials, and they also rely on Pell Grants. And are they going to make a mistake by getting some small sponsorship from somebody that's going to potentially disallow them from getting financial aid? And what's that tipping point look like based on your school? And to really just start to read up on that and learn about it, and talk to your athletes and their parents and your staff internally to really just stay ahead of it as you're looking into the fall and beyond. Because like I said, July is going to be here before we know it. So some of these schools are going to start dealing with it pretty quickly.
Absolutely. It's a brave new world.
It is. So thank you all for tuning in and hearing our take on what we think the hot topics are heading into 2021. Want to give you one quick announcement. The CABMA and NACDA conventions, of course, have been moved to a virtual setting. And the one great thing that I think CABMA is doing is they're engaging membership throughout the year with various webinar opportunities. We will be putting some information out there soon about an upcoming webinar in February that we'll be facilitating for the CABMA members, and we're excited to get to see you all virtually, and really excited for 2022 when we can see you all again in person.
Absolutely.
But thank you to our listeners for tuning into News and Brews Sports Biz as we advocate for the financial voices in college athletics to be heard. If there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, or if you'd like to join us, please contact us through our website at jmco.com. And in the meantime, you can follow us on social media for more news as the collegiate athletics landscape continues to rapidly evolve. Cheers.
Cheers.